My name is Katrina Lewis, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this number 4 of 5 events for critical AI in the Art Museum, Politics and Practices, an extended discussion of the political economy and data practices that inform AI imaginaries proliferating inside and outside the Art Museum. Today, I'm joined by Erica Molesworth, who will be helping moderate today's panel. The program today is brought to you by the Computational Culture Lab in the School of Art and Design at the Australian National University in Canberra. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking today on stolen Aboriginal land, the country of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri peoples, whose sovereignty was never ceded. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and welcome any First Nations colleagues and friends joining us today. For those of us joining for the first time, let me begin with a quick recap. Artist Hito Stahl introduced the series with a keynote lecture on subprime images, the statistical renderings generated by text-to-image models. She argued that products like DALL-E and Stable Diffusion are onboarding tools, normalizing a new political economy of visual production. These points were taken up by panelists in our second event on the future of the commons and open culture in an age of AI extractivism. Paul Keller of the Open Future Foundation and Maui Hudson from the University of Waikato discussed data colonialism in the context of EU policy, Creative Commons, and Indigenous data sovereignty. Last week, our panelists discussed the limits of the way art institutions model the digital in order to understand how museum directors, curators, and other cultural workers might move beyond a modernist embrace of technology as a new avant-garde to develop a more critically reflexive praxis. We will conclude next week on Thursday with a closing keynote by artist and author James Bridle. You can register for his keynote or catch previous talks at our website, which I believe Erica will be popping in the chat at this moment. So today we have a brilliant lineup of artists for our final panel on data, bodies, models, publics. In organising this panel, I reflected on how in the past 2 decades, a certain strand of museum technology discourse has celebrated the arrival of eye tracking systems, beacons, Wi-Fi surveillance and analytics platforms in the museum, positioning both visitors and the White Cube as dangerous data black spots to be studied and classified in order to optimize both gallery spaces and audiences. With this in mind, I've invited a number of artists and scholars who, long before the GPT hype, have been thinking about the way bodies and publics are modeled by machine learning and how to represent this. I'm hoping today's panel will further illuminate how artists and other cultural workers in the museum sector might appropriate, intervene, or reclaim machine learning for progressive cultural and social ends. Before I introduce our speakers, a few housekeeping notes. You'll notice we're not running this in webinar mode, which means we can all enjoy each other's collective presence. However, this means we have muted all your mics while the panel is speaking to avoid auditory overload. We are recording this event. If you'd like to remain anonymous, please change your name and keep your camera off. Our panelists will talk for about 15 minutes each, leaving time for discussion at the end. We've activated the Q&A module to manage this, so please help us by submitting your questions there at any point during the event. When it comes to Q&A time, we'll ask you if you'd like to unmute and ask your question live, but please let us know when you submit your question if you prefer us to read it for you. So in order of those speaking, I will now introduce our artists. Simone C. Niquille is a designer and researcher based in Amsterdam. Her practice, Technoflesh Studio, investigates the representation of identity and the digitization of biomass in the network space of appearance. She leads the Parametric Truth Lab at Design Academy Eindhoven, a space for documentation and annotation of software with a focus on new ways of seeing. Currently, she is investigating the architectural and bodily consequences of computer vision, researching the politics of synthetic training datasets. Machine listening is an investigation and an experiment in collective learning instigated by Sean Dockeray, James Parker, and Joel Stern. Their work addresses machine listening, not simply as technical innovation, but an emergent field of knowledge power, of data extraction and colonialism, capital accumulation, automation, and control. The project takes numerous forms, including collaborative research, resource sharing, curation, publishing, and artist production. Vladan Joler is Professor of New Media at the University of Novi Sad and founder of the Share Foundation, an organization that is dedicated to protecting the rights of internet citizens, researching algorithmic transparency, digital labor exploitation, invisible infrastructures, black boxes, and many other contemporary phenomena. With Kate Crawford, he is imminently about to launch Calculating Empires, a genealogy of technology and power at Fondazione Prada, an exhibition that charts our technological present by depicting how power and technology have been intertwined since 1500. And our final speaker, who I think I saw sneak in with the audience, Caroline Sinders. Hi, Caroline, is a machine learning design researcher and artist. And for the past few years, she has been examining the intersections of technology, interface design, AI abuse, and politics in digital conversational spaces. She is the founder of Convocation Design and Research, an agency focused on the intersections of machine learning, user research, designing for public good, and solving difficult communication problems. Welcome to all our fabulous panelists. It's going to be jam-packed today. So we'll kick off immediately with Simone. Would you like to take over the screen?
Yes, thank you for this intro and thanks for having me. I'll do the screen belay. Here we go. All good? Yes. So I'll do my best to quickly give an overview of some past and recent work and a little bit situate my practice. Sort of as a designer researcher based in Amsterdam, I also now start using this term that I've left behind like 15 years ago of photographer. Again, as I find it useful to describe the practice, but we'll get a little bit to that, and I'm happy to discuss. I think central in my practice is always this object of a camera, be it a physical object or be it a virtual camera. And the one you're looking at here is from a synthetic training data set. One work I wanted to just start out with is from 10 years ago, from 2013, which is called Real Face Camouflage. It was a set of t-shirts that was a reaction to the widespread use at that time, well, still, of face recognition technology. I was mainly quite disturbed by how it slowly trickled into the interface of Facebook with the ability to tag faces in photos. And at the same time, in the summer of 2012, there were what was titled the London riots. What you would see online is quite a lot of sort of crowdsourcing of sort of people getting together on different forums like Google Plus, etc., that was still around back then, to try and analyze CCTV footage. So taking screenshots of the footage that was shared by the Metropolitan Police online on the Flickr account of the Met Police, the London Met Police. And try and use at that point or at that time open source face recognition technology to link people's Facebook profiles to these CCTV screenshots that were shared on this platform that was, you know, you would associate with sort of vacation photos, and suddenly was co-opted by the London Met Police as a sort of way to distribute people that were quote unquote looting and suddenly were criminalized, but on a very, very public court. And so I was simply interested in, hey, but as a someone, again, that comes from a photography background. I was very interested in identity and how that forms and how that takes shape in a digital space. And this sort of conflicting notion of being able to be anyone you would want, sort of very dreamlike idea, utopian idea, that your digital opens up sort of a multitude. But at the same time, this sort of realization of a profile photo really cementing you as this one person. And so this series of T-shirts was using celebrity lookalikes to try and confuse and play a little bit, on the one hand, with the technology, the way that technology will recognize or try to recognize and identify a face and link it to a identity, and at the same time also the human inability or ability to do the same kind of mechanism. Why I'm showing this work now still is, I think for me it really was an important piece, and also a little bit of a turning point of realizing my own position. Like the way it was received by the press was this sort of ultimate solution, right? I think already calling myself a designer was sort of this idea that yes, you do research, you analyze the technology, and then you offer a solution of how to live or sort of deal with it. So this idea was suddenly that you put on these shirts and everything's fine, works as sort of dazzle camouflage, and now you can go about your business, and it sort of thwarts any technology. And to me, that was quite worrisome, that there is such a thing as a product that you can buy, rather than behavior or rituals that you have to rethink. And at the same time, also this idea that maybe suddenly this T-shirt acted like the bug report, right? It was like showing ways that the technology might not function as well, and can be improved upon. And so it led me on a path to think of how machine learning actually functions, still in quotation marks, but looking into training data sets. And so yeah, and so one thing I'll put forth today is this idea that computation is the new optics, so that the camera has been replaced by a set of mechanisms. Thinking specifically of the sort of slogan by Eastman Kodak from 1888, that you push the button and we do the rest. This idea that, okay, what is that rest? Specifically with things like computational photography, where in this presentation by Apple in 2018, presenting the new camera abilities of the iPhone XS, one sort of the push of the button suddenly triggers 1 trillion operations per photo. And I was specifically interested in, most of the work I do is sort of in the last bit of that stack, which is sort of face detection, facial landmarking, and segmentation, which all border on either computational, like CGI, so generated imagery to some extent, and have this strange fuzzy border between constructed images, the idea of a capture, and where do those meet, and where do those support each other. And the set of work that I'll talk about today further is pretty much centered on this camera, which is the camera module by the Roomba vacuum cleaner. And most of this work was set off by this video by the company Boston Dynamics, a robotics company based in Boston, Massachusetts. They were advertising or announcing this robot called Spot Mini through this video. And it was their first attempt to launch a product for a consumer market, specifically also a robot that could potentially be used in the domestic space. I was quite struck by this video because the robot enters right at the beginning. It starts in this empty warehouse and it kind of enters the scenography of a domestic space. It's this sort of house that was built to show its abilities. And I was quite interested in, okay, but how do you define something like a home or a domestic space in a training data set? How does this robot in this scene here separate like a dirty glass from trash, right? Like such a subjective category. How do you label that? Who's training this? Who's defining that? As always, Boston Dynamics builds in these kind of slapstick moments to try and sort of humanize their machines. But at the end of the day, my biggest sort of question was, okay, if we are at some point supposed to sort of cohabit with these kinds of machines, how do they navigate, how do they orientate and sort of make sense of the spaces that they're supposed to live with? And so to get a sense of what this sort of house was, I rebuilt it in the Blender 3D software. And one thing I was super struck by is that I didn't have to model anything. Everything was sort of plug and play. Like the house, I could just easily download from sort of the SketchUp warehouse library, because it was such a standardized sort of Sears catalog, early 1900s model. And the same would apply. These are depth renders of the house. And the same would apply for all of the furniture, which was all IKEA. And looking on Google Maps, you can see that the Boston Dynamics offices, at that point at least, was fairly close to IKEA in Boston, Massachusetts. So I guess it was more, right, not so much intentional, but probably happenstance, as in like, hey, we're like putting together this space for the robot to navigate through. We need a bunch of furniture. Where do we get it? Obviously, we go to IKEA. And this sort of, decision-making processes that actually feel quite, to some extent, mundane, to some extent intuitive, but always based on a team, assembling this data that at the end of the day presents itself as very logical once it becomes a computer vision recognition technology, was the thing that I was most interested in. At the same time, there were these sort of headlines, this is from 2015, where agency was really bestowed on the robot or the machine itself, right? Sort of South Korean woman's hair eaten by robot vacuum cleaner as she slept. Whereas, right, looking at the image, there's so much more going on. Like, why would the robot get entangled in her hair might also be based on the fact that she is sleeping on a futon and not on the bed that you would buy at IKEA. So again, this sort of whole level of standardization that was built potentially unintentionally into these kind of technologies that was much more based on human decision-making rather than any technological fault. And so that led me down a path to looking at synthetic data and a sort of collection of works that I call Model Home. So this idea of assembling a model home through CGI data that's been happening within the sort of synthetic training data sets research community. And when I say synthetic data, what that means in this specific context, because it can mean very different things, but when we're looking at computer vision and at indoor spaces, what that means is that there are 3D data, so meshes of floor plans and of products, of objects, of accessories that could potentially appear in a domestic space. And those are assembled in 3D, in virtual space, into these sort of domestic spaces. What you see here with just sort of dotted lines are camera trajectories, so the way a virtual camera would move through this virtual space, which would render a video. And the frames of that video, so the 2D images, the JPEGs literally of that video is what ends up being the training data. So it relies on the 3D data to assemble the spaces, but what's being used to train is very much sort of the top left, number 2, right? The frames that are the result of these camera movements through the space. And looking at one which at that time, around 2016, and still to this date, you see crumbs of it moving through references in research papers. One of the biggest training data sets of that kind was CNET RGBD, which was assembled by the Dyson Robotics Lab at Imperial College in London. And I was really interested in, okay, then how are they gonna again, sort of label, define, organize all of that data. And one thing is the definition of rooms, so that you'd have a bedroom, an office scene, a kitchen, and a living room. And there already, there's a huge assumption of how someone's house is divided into spaces. At the same time, the individual objects that will be within this data sets, and just highlighting, for example, gun and sword, like, are we talking about weapons or are we talking about a toy? And the way I work with that data often ends up being either in writing or in 3D animations to use what normally would be hidden inside of a resulting technology as sort of the front and center, the main character of a video, and also to use the capabilities of 3D rendering to try and show different ways of representing that information. So what you're looking at here is one of these guns, but shown as a depth render. So you're not so much looking at the object, but the object appears through the calculation of distance from the virtual camera, being the lightest color to the black in the background, which makes the object appear to a render like this, which is what we're much more used to seeing from 3D renders, which is an object with textures. Which suddenly can completely change the way you might interpret the object, right? The context is much clearer to the other image. There's more information given here. And so, again, sorting through the different levels of organization, so from the one to sort of the labeling of rooms, the labeling of objects, down to the idea or to the textures that would be applied to these objects. Particularly, I was struck by the image on the top right, which is one of these called office scenes. And what you're looking at here is a projection surface. That's what they would call any sort of, well, projection screen or a TV or any sort of screen holding media. And that folder simply contains two JPEGs, both from the US Fox News TV channel. And here again, the question is, right, like how far does that actually influence the resulting technology? But still, there is quite a specific bias within only allowing TV surfaces to display Fox News. And at the same time, going into the folder chair, we immediately see how there's, mistakes that are either, I think there's a spectrum of absurdity and violence, and the two meet in a sort of very specific mundanity, which is very uneasy. Where you suddenly have a wheelchair that's also been labeled as an armchair, you have an electric chair, a stroller, and a toilet. And all of them just kind of are thrown into a folder called chair to train the computer vision system. Speaking to the researchers, they were quite frustrated that there were like too many toilets. So the computer vision system was completely overfitted and kept on recognizing toilets and everything. And so what they're struggling with is the fact that daily life is much more ambiguous and complex than can be simplified in a training data set. And this has been titled to some extent daily life noise, which I would argue is simply just life. To some extent also the beauty of not being able to be completely simplified, reduced and sorted into neat categories. But that's a little bit the space, and I think that's where at least the position of a photographer I'm interested in, as in documenting these synthetic worlds that are being used to then map on top of the spaces that we move within. But thank you very much. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Simone. That was really interesting way to get us started. We have lost Katrina momentarily, but we'll just move straight on to machine listening and hopefully she'll jump back in.
Hello.
Hey, everyone. Hope Katrina rejoins us. Simone, that was awesome. Thank you. Really nice to follow on from you. My name is Joel Stern. I'm one of the 3 machine listening members joining you from unceded Wurundjeri country, Naarm, Melbourne. Here with my collaborators, Sean Dockeray and James Parker. Do you guys want to say hello?
Hi. I'm in London. Hello, everybody. Normally based in Naarm as well.
Yeah, so we were having a late night Zoom last night, and I guess it was your daytime in London, James, trying to work out how to respond to this question of how to critically engage with an AI system. And I think, you know, where we started with was that machine listening is kind of an AI system, or sort of a system of, you know, that we've described as being about the computation of sound and speech. And, you know, inevitably that is sort of networked computation. So, you know, one of the first tasks for us was to, you know, how to actually produce machine listening as a kind of coherent subject, something that we
I mean,
could
can I
grapple
step back
with.
a little bit from that? Because in a way, like, it's like, should machine listening be produced as a coherent subject? Like, is there a coherence there? Like, I mean, in some ways, like, how to critically engage with the AI systems involves, like, you know, picking or working out what kind of scale to operate in, right? And there was a kind of a wager at the beginning of the project, which was that something like machine listening deserved a kind of a critical attention. And there's a kind of partly a definitional work, partly a kind of political work, partly a work of community formation built on the wager, effectively, that something like an object called machine listening existed or needed to be formed as a problem, as a kind of a problem space. And I kind of, the conversation yesterday brought to light to me that's the starting point for the project.
And right, and so that was in 2020 when we started the project. We were kind of unsure of how to define the subject, and I don't know, are we any closer in 2023 to being there? I don't know. What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, probably not. But and that look, I think Katrina's prompt of like how to critically engage with machine learning is like the perennial question. It's like we have these things out there, like what do we do about them, and like what strategies, what methods, like how do we even approach these things? And I think yeah, through the project, like we've done a bunch of different things, so it's probably worth just listing those, because I think by saying I think like what becomes kind of obvious is that it's machine learning systems are not simple things. You know, they're not a homogeneous singular thing. They're very complex, and similarly they require like sort of complex, like really very different complex forms of approaches. So you mentioned like community building. Certainly, like we started off by trying to build a curriculum because machine listening was something we didn't know anything about. So we had to teach ourselves, learn about it. And so one way to do that is to kind of like initiate a pedagogical process. Like, what is this thing? Like, how do we collect resources? How do we find people who are already working on this? Because there was a large community of people already working on things. So, I mean, I think you're really well suited to talk about like the curatorial, the parts of it.
Yeah, no, I think definitely. I mean, I did a you know, my PhD doctoral research was in curatorial practice at Monash, where you know, the key project that I undertook was actually in collaboration with James. It was called Eavesdropping, and Sean came into that project as an artist. And that's sort of what led us into working together as machine listening. But definitely the curatorial strategy and approach of kind of pulling people together, giving the topic a kind of gravitational pull, and sort of collecting these sort of intellectual resources from people's practices and ideas, and trying to bring them into conversation and hold them together was a key aspect of instigating this project. And we actually launched the curriculum project with a series of online events, you know, much like this one on Zoom, in 2020 in collaboration with Unsound Festival and Liquid Architecture. And they were really a chance for us to work through with about 20 or 30 other participants and collaborators a set of leading questions that we thought could bring this topic topic of machine listening could sort of tease it out of its kind of haziness into something a little more sort of contoured.
I mean, it might
What
be
do
a
you think,
good
James?
opportunity.
Oh, go on, Sean.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just gonna say it might be a good opportunity to like bring this out of the haziness a little bit into the like sort of specificity of some of the things that we've encountered in the process of the project. So, like we wanted to play a couple of things. I know you do. Do you have the slides up or no? I can't.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm a Zoom amateur again.
Should we go into the first audio example? We kind of laced this rather loose conversation with 3 audio examples, and they're sort of in some ways illustrative, in other ways they're kind of like just operating in parallel with the conversation. But maybe I'll play the first one just to break up the conversation a little bit.
Booms bo wota za u pogif qui iwan. Six stars. Bibo dollar bibo fums bo. Hey. Fums bo wota za bu rota za au po fums bo wota za u po bo rota za au pogo fums bo wota za u pogo bo rota za u pogif fums bo wota za u pogif quai. One racket rinzakete oh bo 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 Quai. One did it and Roy. Miftil of 2 did it and piff till of 2. That's an I piff till of 2. Oh, that's an piff till of 2 till all the reason and piff till of 2 till Joker Jaruka. Karatadu, 2 from Bowotazau, Pogifka, there doesn't and her, and piff till of 2 till Juka, Renzeket baby, Anskermu, Ziu and Ziu. Thank you.
Probably could have ended that a bit earlier, but I wanted to get to the thank you bit at the end.
I mean, there is a way of trying to kind of build that into the story we were already telling. So like amongst the kind of, all the community building or, problem space forming, the curation, there's an interview series, all of this stuff. There has been a kind of an attention to the specificity of the things that we're dealing with as well. I mean, there's a sort of fairly generic or kind of general, critical strategies, of course. But that thing we just played there, Clone Ursonate, was a recent performance at Unsound Festival in Krakow of the famous Kurt Schwitter's sound poem, Dada sound poem, which we had performed by a clone that we built using commercial software, but sort of pushing that software sort of against itself a little bit, or expanding it, or sort of fleshing it out. And the reason I mentioned that is just because the project has always kind of been grounded in an attention to questions of listening. There is a kind of specificity, like what's the intervention of machine listening as a project, I suppose. One thing is to bring listening more fully into the conversation of the critical study of AI systems. And that doesn't just mean, although it does mean studying specific, voice cloning systems and so on, but also putting those systems into conversation with the histories of listening, histories of music production and kind of avant-garde experimental music and things. So that sort of, that's a bit of a vague way of explaining it, but just to say, to constantly be holding ourselves to how is listening as a method, what is it offering to us here? Like what's the critical purchase? What is thinking with listening do. It's kind of been a bit of a refrain throughout the project. I mean, and I think, Joel, you've got the listening to data sets sort of project queued up. Maybe we could briefly explain that, because it's sort of a pretty good example of what that, how that, where
yeah,
that
no,
takes.
exactly. Yeah. So, and I just want to mention as well, I think I saw David Chesworth's name in the participants list, and he is the person whose original voice sample was used to train that voice clone which performed a sonata there. So, yeah, so we've got the actual person on Zoom, and then the replica reading the poem. And yeah, as James mentioned, yeah, listening has sort of been the primary strategy. And so, we've been listening to voice clones as well as making them. And we've been listening as well to audio data sets, these sort of vast collections of audio which are found online, which are used to train machine listening systems. And, spent much of the past year or more really going through and sort of exploring these incredibly sort of strange and often banal collections of sound, and having the feeling like that there probably not that many humans have necessarily taken the time to listen to these things, because they are precisely collections of sound which are meant for machine ears to train machine systems, rather than to be listened to by humans with the sort of time that takes and the attention that takes. And so here's just a little montage of some...
I just quickly jump in before we do the montage. Just to say, like, what's the critical purchase? If you enter the problem of this data set from the perspective of data set studies, for example, which is a very important field, that's developing, you might begin with questions of like bias, or questions of like the political economy of their production. And those are really, really important questions. But there is a certain kind of decentering of those questions that happens when you start with the question of listening. And, what is it that these things do as a sonic collection specifically? And it's about sort of adding into that critical vocabulary or critical methodology, I suppose, like what happens when you listen. Try really hard to listen to these and see where it leads you,
We were away a year ago. The blue spot is on the key again. How hard did he hit him? We eat eggs every Easter. My mama makes lemon jam.
Say the word, voice.
Say the word, judge.
Say the word, germ.
Say the word, search.
I'm having a hard time reading because the letters are all fuzzy. I have an internal pain I cannot describe. I'm feeling cold, though the temperature is high.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a little montage from a collection of different audio data sets, all used for different purposes, ranging from emotion recognition to sort of medical data sets for automated kind of responses to medical complaints, through to sounds you heard like the keyboard tapping and the doors slamming, which are a data set of office sounds used to train a system to recognize those very same kinds of sounds, the soundscape of an everyday office environment. And the I guess what's sort of being hinted at in montaging those sounds that way is the sort of compositional or sort of artistic potential of sort of working with these materials in kind of non-linear, sort of rationalized ways, and kind of applying other logics to them. And so maybe we're just going to sort of follow that thread into a final example, and then give a brief explanation of it after.
Oh God, oh good, oh God, oh good, oh good, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh good, oh good, oh good, oh good, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh good, oh God, oh God,
Oh God, oh good, oh God, oh good, oh so good, oh God, oh God, oh good, oh good, oh good, oh good, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh good, oh God, oh God.
Oh good, dude, oh good, oh God, oh good, oh it's good, oh God, oh God, oh good, oh good, oh God, oh good, oh God, oh good, oh good, oh God, oh good, oh good, oh God, oh God.
Oh God, oh God, oh good, oh God, oh good, oh God, dude, oh good, oh good, oh good, oh Gus, oh Gus, oh good, oh good, oh God, oh good, oh God, oh God, oh good, oh good.
Oh God, oh good, oh God, oh good, oh God, oh good.
I'm going to stop it there, even though there was like a tiny bit more, but you know, oh God, we've sort of gone over time. But I feel like it'd just be super weird to end just without offering even the briefest explanation of what that was. And I mean, Sean, I know you hate it when I throw to you, but I'm going to throw to you just
that's fine. Yeah. And I will move on quickly because we have gone over time. But basically, we fed the Sonata that we played you at the beginning through Whisper AI, and that turned out to be with the transcript. And I suppose the reasons for that have been a topic of ongoing discussion. Maybe something we can return to, but otherwise, thanks and welcome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sean, James, and Joel. My goodness, lots to think about there. Shall we hand over to Vladan next?
Okay. Hey, this was this was really great. I really enjoyed the It's because I also like we were like doing a lot of investigations into data sets, but not much into audio data sets, and then like this, what you did is like really fantastic. I really enjoyed it. So I will share a screen. Okay. Yeah, this is a bit, usually, it's always these big black maps. So basically my approach to this topic is really some kind of like 10 years of or even more like different types of investigations, and those investigations somehow always end up in big black maps. And so I have this kind of like really bad habit to start with the one dot and then end up with something that have like several meters and a lot of different dots. No? But basically I really didn't want it to the idea when I started those investigations were like really not, I really didn't have this idea that it will go there. Basically what I really wanted, it's just to try to find a way how to see and to understand all of those like layers of untransparencies, because like idea was like, okay, I'm usually what I'm looking at or what I'm listening, it's mostly some kind of let's say interface, no, some kind of screen, or but this idea that behind the screen you have some kind of
huge world of different kinds of invisible infrastructures, invisible relations, invisible processes. And it really started like step by step from one single internet packet, and then it went, for example, to this image of like this is like some kind of network topography of one internet service provider in Serbia, and then it went further and further. We said, okay, now we can see the network, what is behind the network. There is some kind of like servers, and where are they, and what's inside the server, and what kind of processes. So basically, this went to another big black map. It's this one when we spent again a few years trying to understand like what is the process within this kind of factory that we call Facebook algorithmic factory, and because we were investigating Facebook that time. So I was like really into step by step trying to find a way how to see and how to investigate those places. So and to do that, we use like a lot of different kinds of methods of investigation and methods of seeing, from some kind of like mass scraping of interfaces to massive like trace routing of all the IP addresses in Serbia back then, but then like it went further, or like doing some kind of deep dive into thousands of patents. So like trying to find, because my feeling and my idea was like that, you know, like we are lacking this kind of transparency of understanding what's going on there, but it's really hard also to investigate, especially when you are outside of this black box. And then so we try to find the way and to develop different tools in a way to try to understand those layers. And then basically with anatomy of an AI system, everything exploded in like many different directions. Now, like from when we realized that, you know, it's not just about flows, you know, it's not just about like also algorithmic processes, it's also about flows of materials. And I started to be like really interested in this materiality of this planetary scale systems of computation, planetary scale systems of like production, planetary scale systems of extraction, and basically not just extraction of data or extraction of our bodies, but also extraction of nature and how they're intertwined together, and so on, so on. So basically, but for me it was interesting. It's also this kind of like hyperdimensionality of those relations and those structures, because basically you can, you know, even this map, it's basically in this one line exploring this like path of voice, like when you say something to this Amazon Alexa, but each of those dots, you know, like you can from each of those dots you can basically go into completely another direction. So for example, into following the path of the internet packet, you can also follow the electricity, you know, and then the story is becoming completely different. You know, you turn there from this point and go into another way and another infrastructure, but somehow at the end you always finish in the earth, you know, because like also this electricity in my country and my part of the world, it's coming mostly from the coal. So those kind of hyperdimensionality was something like super interesting for me. But then also the point is like I also switched from this kind of like understanding, you know. First in the beginning I was like, I believe in this kind of forensic research, you know, as a something, because I spent a lot of time with a friend of mine who was he's still some kind of cyber forensic, you know? And also I was like surrounded with the lawyers, so I believed in this kind of legal analysis. But then once you get the picture and you are seeing this like how it looks like, for me the main question was like, why or what kind of power we are seeing, what kind of power relation, how we can speak about that, like how, in a way, like I was always struggling with because I'm mostly like a visual person, you know. I was always struggling with this kind of those essays and like how to write about that, how to speak about that, because like and spending like almost same amount of time in like understanding why, after I was seeing how it looked like. So for example, so in that sense, for me, that was like also super important. And then basically you need to have like completely different, here you're using like for investigation, you're using one type or many different tools, but basically for understanding why you are, or my point was like, of you was like, you need to use the language of or like not language, but basically the lenses, different kinds of lenses, the lens of philosophy, the lens of critical media theory, the lens of art. And then this is why I started more to collaborate basically with let's say scholars or philosophers who are coming from the social side than technical, because I was like less and less interested in the technical, you know. But in a way, that the thing is, you need somehow to have both, because like we cannot speak about like social and political dimensions if we don't dive deep into the anatomy of those systems. You know? So I have this kind of idea that the understanding materiality is one of the possible, not the only one, of course, but for me, like one of the possible ways to try to understand wider political and social context. Because if for example, I was like always like, you have a lot of those like I don't know, like EU, not just the EU, but around the world, you have like hundreds and hundreds of these kind of ethical AI manifestos. You know? But most of them, they're like speaking just about some little segment of what I was seeing as a real anatomy of those places. So for me, like the question of AI ethics, it's a much wider question that it cannot be solved just within the data set. You know, like the data set is just like one little part of it. And it's really powerful because like what is within the data set is going to be projected to the world, you know. But if we are seeing this kind of really wide anatomy of those systems and seeing some kind of totality of those like relations and structures, then you understand that it's not just about that. And what was like interesting for me, it's like also how like from, I don't know, 2018 when we did this map, how this map evolved. Okay, map didn't evolve at all because I really don't want to you know, draw one map all my life and upgrade because it's always changing, no? But in a way, what we see is that like you know, all of those parts of like fractal supply chain, for example, became like weaponized. Basically, they became some kind of territories of conflict, territories of war, because like when we were like doing this research in like 16, 17, 18, it was kind of like this kind of flow was like functioning almost perfectly. You didn't saw a lot of hiccups in supply chains, and then suddenly with COVID and now with like all of those, like it became really, not just with COVID, but all of those now relations between China and US and everything, it became super political, you know, like, and then, you know, even if you're really not interested in this like everyday situation, but this thing with the open AI drama and you see like one of the stories is basically the Sam wanted to basically establish his own production of microchips or something like this, no? so you see that the battlefield is basically everywhere in there. And then you're seeing, for example, NVIDIA becoming the most valuable, one of the most valuable companies, because they keep one of those like parts of this extended anatomy. So this process of extraction, it's basically the warfare of extraction. It's happening on many different places. So it is like some kind of wild west in where now they're trying to basically conquer all the data sets ever, all the books ever written in the world, all the sounds ever created, because like this became somehow like the most important resource. So there is like one battlefield there. Another battlefield is like how to dominate the supply chain and how to not allow the others to be part of this supply chain. So you are the only one who have access to the graphic cards or whatever. So it's becoming really dynamic, this processes that are happening there. Of course, no one is into the death of those devices, because it's just like doing it fast now, and no one cares about what will happen with all of those like data centers and devices in several years. So, and then the basically another thing that was kind of like interesting for me, and what I really tried to do, for example, with the new extractivism. New extractivism, this like I don't know, the term new extractivism really came to me with anatomy and this kind of like, and then I was like thinking like first of all, I was like really in love with I wanted somehow to pay a respect to all of the wonderful thinkers and ideas that in order to understand the meaning of all of those like images and maps that I was making, I was like having fun, because I was also in love with this kind of like, once you are deep into investigation of patterns, then like I started to fall in love in this aesthetic of patterns. And then I was thinking, okay, all of those like wonderful concepts and ideas that I was like thinking of and reading from other people about like how to understand those power relations. So how we can, what will be if I try, for example, to, I don't know, like draw some kind of like Marx idea of, I don't know, dialectic of subject and object into the patent drawing. What will happen if Marx wanted to patent his like concept, or like Foucault or whatever? So I draw this map of like different concepts and ideas and philosophy behind all of this, because I think what is like really shocking for me, we are not able to define the contemporary factory, like we are not able to define those like new relations, because most of the time it's completely, you don't feel it as a labor, you don't feel it as an extraction. There is no any kind of, body sensation of being extracted, when this kind of data surplus that you are producing is being extracted. So it's really hard to think about labor, but somehow the world now, the biggest companies are basically extracting those resources, our bodies as the resources. And so for me, this question of like how we can speak about these new relations, because I think what we are living now some kind of crisis of mostly social sciences and philosophy, because we are not able to define those new relations. We are not able to define these new forms of extraction. And this is why this work for me, even if it's completely wild, and I'm really not so usually avoiding to present and to do lectures around this, because like people are starting to be like really depressed and have some kind of anxiety of it. And then like one time before in I think in Amsterdam, I was like, there was some human being in the audience, and he called this that some kind of postmodern terrorist poetry that should be forbidden. And I really like that. I wanted to make a T-shirt like postmodern terrorist poetry. It's like, it's fantastic, you know. But it is hard to speak about, like, to define these new forms of extraction, to define, because it goes everywhere, you know, like, and this position of us you're not able to define, you have a different positions there. You have a position of a resource, your body, emotions, ideas, cognitive processes, voice, everything that you can think of is becoming a resource. So that means, like, your body is an ultimate, your body and your mind, it's an ultimate resource. But then in the same time, you are also having a position of being a worker. You are, you know, all the time feeding those systems. You are the one who need to participate there. And then you're also being sold as a product, and all of those, like, complexity of those relations. But I think this is the key. So, like, somehow to wrap up, I think there are, like, two different, from my point of view, like, two different, like, main ideas. Is like, one, we need to find a way how to investigate those systems, because we are seeing this also with like this new generative AI models. You know, in the beginning they're kind of like semi-transparent, now they're completely untransparent, and we need to find a way how to investigate them, but also, like, once we find the tools how to investigate them, we need to find the words and meanings and ideas how to speak about them as well, how to define, like, what we exactly want there, you know, what's wrong there, you know, because we can have, like, I don't know, data set, and even we have, like, access to the data set, is like question, like, what exactly we want there. Like, okay, if every kind of, like, idea, if I want the ethical data sets, is also question ethical by who, you know, who is the one who will say this is the right amount of people with that kind of characteristics of or color or gender, or like, what's the, how we can speak about that. And then another problem, it's I think and this is something that we faced within this research project called Knowing Machines, is like the scale is becoming completely crazy. And so how you are examining something that have a billions of pieces, you know, you don't have a hardware to do it, you don't have words to do it, you don't have a tools to do it. And the problem, the tools that you need to develop will again be some kind of statistical tools, you know. So we are, it is a really challenge to deal with this on many different levels. So, but for me, there are two main ones. The one, it's like seeing into and then trying to come up with some kind of you know, concepts and ideas, what exactly we want there, and how we can define this new political or labor relation or new forms of exploitation. Okay, did I spoke too much or not? No. Yes.
You're fine.
No.
We're fine. We might extend the Q&A by 5 minutes if we're overwhelmed by questions. And I noticed that people are already responding to questions in the Q&A module. So guys, if you have any questions, just throw them in. Thank you so much, Vladan. We're gonna have one more talk by Caroline Sinders, and then we'll have time for a brief Q&A. So Caroline, would you like to take over our screens?
Yes, thank you so much. Let me just get started. Really excited to be here. Lovely to see so many friends. Hi, Erica. It's been such a long time. Always good to see you. Also, hello, Vladan. Also good to see you as well. But yeah, thank you so much for having me, everyone. And I'm excited to share some of my work. I'll try to go as quickly as possible so we have time to chat. So I'm Caroline. I am a human rights researcher and artist, and I work in what is defined as civil society. So we can think of that as like adjacent to government and industry, in a way, perhaps watching both of those spaces. I also worked with groups like the Mozilla Foundation, the Harvard University, the Weizenbaum Institute, and also the United Nations. My background is in photojournalism, research design, and art. So I see everything through this lens of legibility and research storytelling, which are skills I honed as a photojournalist. And so with these skills, I make art and I do human rights research, focusing through this lens of how design and technology affect people in their everyday lives. And I run a human rights lab. We're called Convocation. We're an advocacy design research lab. We use open source investigative tools, data visualization, digital forensics, trauma-informed design, human rights design research, art, and policy to investigate how technology impacts marginalized groups. And we look at a lot of different topics. And one of the topics that's probably most related to this group is looking at AI's impacts in society as a safety issue and how it's used and misunderstood, and in even ways perhaps missold if we look at things like generative AI to the public. And we're interested in how to sort of mitigate these harms, how to make AI better by working with the general public, but by also working with artists and academics and policy researchers. So working across these disciplines, art making is still a core part of my focus. I mentioned earlier I was trained as a photographer and I still am one. And this is a project I'll get into later, which was a collaboration with Anna Ridler. Image making and sense making, and what I think of as this guttural moment of reality that photography sort of projects, and how that overlaps with speculative fiction and critical design are key areas that I like to explore. Technology, for me, is my metaphorical paintbrush. Metaphorical, there's the keyword, because I'm an atrocious painter, but that's fine. That's not my medium. But technology is one of the main mediums I work in as an analog photographer, as a digital photographer, as someone who works with AI and video games. These are all of my different paintbrushes for me that I use when creating art. And right now, I think is a very interesting time to make with AI because of this onslaught of generative AI. To be more distinct, I've started to classify my own AI artwork now as AI-enabled art. So I'm building data sets and I'm either coding or working with other artists and programmers to make our own models. So we are hand making everything. And that is distinctly different from generative AI, given that it's a lot more labor intensive. I know what's in the project often because it's mine. But this is to say, I also do occasionally work at times with aspects of generative AI. And overall, this is my current workflow. This is how I approach problem solving across everything I do in my arts practice and in my human rights practice. I want to make research, and that includes data and analysis because I find it practical. I will highlight that I think that there's a whole other conversation we could have on the decolonization of knowledge and what knowledge transfer looks like, and the issues with sort of legitimizing knowledge and even the word legitimization or institutionalizing knowledge. But all of that for me is wrapped up in research. I think that there are issues that we have to often take community knowledge and sort of place it into a brand new bucket to make it palpable to certain audiences. But that is what this first bucket really holds for me, is all of those tensions with the awareness that sometimes you have to sort of place research in a certain context for it to be seen by those in power. And this is why I often start with this first step of research, again, this practicality. But more importantly, sometimes you are looking at something that maybe hasn't been very widely discussed. And so research can help create something that wasn't there before. It can test a hypothesis to see if it works or doesn't. But the next step for me is activism or advocacy because it's helpful. And this is for me also where we can talk about, more importantly, decolonization, right? Activism allows us to do things we can't do in an academic setting. I firmly believe that we should be working with different kinds of communities and engaging in aspects of co-design and participatory design. Activism allows us to take that community knowledge and recognize that it is knowledge. It allows us to say, like, this is what change could look like. This is the change we want to see, without having to sort of go through this step of like testing that knowledge. Instead, we can do something in the security world we call threat modeling. It's where you take a suggestion and you just sort of talk about what are all the different harms, and you plot them out. And most communities have already done that when they advocate for something. They already know what the harms are. They've already done that threat modeling. So activism becomes this space for us to take research, to take different kinds of foundational findings and say, this is the next step, this is the next level, this is the change we have to see. And that's why it's helpful. But then there's a final step for me, which is art. Art allows for further knowledge transfer and for new opportunities and engagement for communities. Art can visualize and make real future provocations that pull from present urgencies. So art can make visible the invisible. So I think art has a fundamental place inside of any kind of research and human rights practice. Art and cultural institutions are a necessary lever for useful change. If I put on my human rights and civil society hat, they're often institutions that are overlooked by really large scale NGOs and advocacy groups, but ones we should be regularly engaging with. So for me, suddenly this is where all these practices come together and art and research become the same, because I think art can be many things and can have many outputs and be many artifacts. I think an art piece can be research, even if it's academic or human rights based. That means a white paper or an essay is a part of an art practice. It's an art artifact. And that includes workshops and tool buildings and video installations and UX design as well. So for me, it's important to think about how the term art or art artifact can be stretched to encompass so many different kinds of working. So I've broken this into like two different sections of how to divide up a few different projects. And again, so thinking about useful art, how art can be an investigative tool and a manifestation of a system. That means that there can be products or code within this, different kinds of art provocations. This is where, again, art is, I think, visualizing what this change can look like. I think this is important not just for digital literacy, but for creating more nuanced understandings of harm and how complex systems work. So art can reveal those systems while interrogating those systems and even surfacing gaps, harms, and bias. The artwork then becomes a poetic witness and documentation of those harms in the process. So for me, this is where my art project in this data set would fit into that framework, but I'm sure other projects y'all have done would also fit into that. I would argue like Vladan's work would definitely fit under that lens for sure as well. So feminist data set started in 2017 as a response to the many documented problems in technology and bias in machine learning. It's a critical research and art project that is using Professor Kimberly Crenshaw's definition of intersectionality for an investigative framework for analyzing and remaking every step of the machine learning process. And feminist data set has projects within it. So this is TRK, or Technically Responsible Knowledge, an open source project that examines wage inequality and creates open source alternatives to data labeling and training in AI. So this is a part, so this is looking at data labeling, systemic issues around labor and visibility in the creation and maintaining of data sets and structures. TRK was funded by the Mozilla Foundation, and in 2019, I interviewed research labs, artists, and startups who work with Mechanical Turk style services, and I even became a Mechanical Turker for a few months during this time period. So as I was saying, this is this kind of alternative Mechanical Turk. The tool also offers a wage calculator that helps visualize a livable wage for those that are responsible for completing these tasks. One of the things I was struck by is, as an artist who works with AI, just how many research labs, artists, startups use Mechanical Turk style platforms and how the payment structure sort of functions on these platforms, along with how many well-documented cases of horrendous worker-related issues are within these platforms, including underpaid contracts. One of the things I noticed is that the interfaces of these systems often work against trying to pay equitably. There's a lot of research you have to do to try to guess and assume what is a well-paid price, when in fact, the interface could help you do that. It could help you think about how much is someone learning in aggregate, right? So for me, if we think of machine learning as death by 1,000 cuts, I think of TRK as this one very small Band-Aid for one very small cut. The project can't be a solution for all issues related to machine learning, or even a major solution for Amazon's Mechanical Turk, because so many issues related to machine learning are issues of a more deeper ingrained societal inequity, which can only be addressed through large shifts, and I think restructuring in society and legislation. But within that, as an artist, I look at what kinds of work can alleviate or expose those issues. So TRK looks at how through pricing structures, platform incentives, and the invisible nature of gig work, clients underprice, undervalue, and fundamentally misunderstand how tasks are handled in these human as a service platforms. Part of the design thinking around this is also trying to inject transparency into our data set. So inspired by data sheets for data sets, white paper, we inject information into the data set, including a description of what it is, who made it, what was the point of the data set, and when it was made. User experience design is a utilitarian intelligence focusing on architectural layouts, usability, and user flows, but design has a politics to it. It can suppress or uplift content. So design, much like technology, isn't neutral. As an artist, I use design as a material to confront and comment on the slickness and inequity of for-profit technologies. So feminist data set and TRK are these examples for me of research, art, and advocacy completely intertwined in one project, and that is often the point. Just really briefly, I'm only going to talk for 2 more minutes because I know we want to have time to discuss. But art also becomes a way for me to synthesize personal interest in community issues and urgencies my own family and direct community face, issues that are now global issues like climate change. And so this becomes a way for me to interrogate art and technology and AI's roles within climate change by also exploring climate change and other large-scale systems. And I didn't realize that the audio was on these videos, and so I will not play this one just immediately. But this is a piece called The Rig 01, which is a mixed media piece exploring a futuristic world, voiced by me, the narrator, where I've overtaken an abandoned oil rig and reclaimed it as my new home. This is one where climate change has accelerated, impacting Louisiana, where I'm from. Louisiana, like many states along the Gulf of Mexico, has an economy deeply intertwined and dependent upon oil and petroleum services, even as that industry ravages our environment and our local cities. Many small-scale oil rigs like this one dot swamps in the Gulf of Mexico, with many like this one being abandoned or closed by the companies, but remaining physically, sometimes often spewing different kinds of materials into the local environment. This one you can't see, but at the very bottom of the platform, there's like an entire small layer of oil that's just sitting there. So in generating the videos and images used in this project, I found this very real abandoned oil rig. So I'm using documentation of the oil infrastructure, something that's so destructive to the environment, to also ruminate on and grapple with how I use AI as an artist and just the large scale systems of environmental impact that surround me. Again, this is one of a larger system. I alone cannot change anything, even if individuals are often told to do small things to grapple with this crisis. My computer, when I'm in Louisiana, is powered by oil. And so this is something I've been thinking about. So by using artistic documentation, a la video camera and new media, such as 3D models, AI models, and Runway's generative AI, it allows me to grapple with grief and hope, situating resiliency with nature overtaking the oil rigs in this video. And that's what the generative AI aspect afforded me with Runway, this imagination of this new space. Oh, turns out I did actually have the audio off. I will send you all a link if you'd like to watch the video. And then lastly, this is a project with Anna Ridler for our Ars Electronica AI Lab project, where we photographed the bald cypress. These are trees that make up swampland that surround the Gulf Coast and Louisiana, where I'm from. They're helpful natural barriers to hurricanes, and they're currently threatened by climate change and human intervention. These trees are usually able to live for thousands of years, and these trees play a crucial role also stopping in coastal erosion, which is key to Louisiana's future. So every 5 minutes, Louisiana loses like a quarter of a football field size of landmass. So the iconic boot shape, we actually don't look like that very much anymore. And so these trees play a massive part in helping protect Louisiana. One of the things we did actually is, so we took all these images before this devastating hurricane 2 years ago called Hurricane Ida. And it turns out we had inadvertently mapped the pathway of Ida without realizing it. I had chosen these waterways specifically along sort of one journey, and that ended up randomly being the journey of Ida. So some of these trees don't exist anymore. These are the last sort of documentation we have. Some of these trees have been knocked down and are now dead. And so in a way, this has now become a poetic archive of sort of active, ongoing, one could argue, climate change, and sort of, I guess, issues related to that. We built a GAN, which briefly you'll see here, around Hurricane Ida data, and we ended up raising over $11,000 for communities in Louisiana by selling this in our artwork for those who are displaced or affected by Hurricane Ida. Here's some of our documentation and a close-up of some of the trees. And this is, I guess, the main takeaway of my work. I am, like writing code, I view art as a necessary tool for making how I want to interact with technology and for making and remaking technology to work for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Brilliant. We have about 9 minutes left for discussions, but if we do get overrun with questions, are our speakers able to just stay back by a couple of minutes? You don't have to turn into a fairy? No? Okay. All good. Okay. Although I do note that none of you have submitted any questions in the Q&A, and you're all absolutely overwhelmed by all the profound things that our speakers have done. And I might be forced to ask the first question if none of you are going to jump in. Okay, you've been warned. No? Okay, I'm going to have a general question for the panel. So I'm mindful, like what we've just heard is a fantastic journey through different kinds of methods for thinking about the different agency of art in this space. And I'm mindful that coming from an institutional perspective, that many institutions are so far away from this. Like I know working in photography institutions, much of the kind of response to even this kind of crisis of literacy and visual literacy has been to slow down the image and just look at it for a really long time, right? And somehow the essential truth of the image would be there in a kind of 20th century view of visual literacy. And then the kind of question of like, well, let's suddenly work with artists, and at the front end of the institution, we'll kind of show sort of cutting edge art that is really engaged with this contemporary moment, whilst working with Microsoft to do new kind of analytics platforms and tracking of audiences at the back end. So I was wondering if our panelists have any thoughts about how you think art institutions could be better thinking through both supporting, practices like your own, which often are longitudinal, that aren't just about the production of a big, snazzy, shiny bit of work to be plonked in the main entrance. What do you think are some of the ways cultural workers, many who may be in the audience, could be thinking better about how to think through this, given in mind that you've been on this journey for a long time, and for many people they're just on the beginning of getting their heads around this? Did anyone want to?
I can go.
Oh, great. Thanks, Caroline.
Yeah, so I'm based in the United Kingdom. Hello, everyone. And I don't have a PhD, and I don't teach on staff somewhere. And I bring those things up because there's some really great initiatives that are happening here in the UK, like the BRAID initiative, for example. So that's a responsible technology funding route that's supported by the UKRI, that is an academic sort of research funding body. And one of the things I've noticed is just that I've been interviewed quite a few times by different researchers and PhD students on an investigatory AI process of how AI art can sort of help reveal very usefully different harms and bias related to artificial intelligence. But one of the things I've noticed is often the artists are never invited in to be co-PIs or co-researchers. We're often subjects. Or when there are arts fellowships, they're often priced lower than the research fellowships. And this is something I've brought up quite a few times. Like, I am a researcher, but I'm a human rights researcher and I'm a civil society researcher. So I'm not credentialed in the same way as an academic researcher. So that also means at times when I'm invited in at a lower pay scale or in a very different or kind of roundabout way. So I think that there are multiple things institutions can do and cultural institutions can do. And I think a lot of that is reframing what a commission looks like or what research looks like to be longer and perhaps better paid in the same way you would invite in a postdoc, for example, or a visiting professor, right, or a visiting curator. Because I think these are some of the most systemic things facing artists. I know that it's incredibly hard for me to get funding for an art project. It's a lot easier for someone to commission me, but there's all different kinds of commissioning rates, or what are considered normal commissioning rates. And often those are still not updated to like the cost of living. Like, I live in London, which is incredibly expensive, right? And, you know, I just think that that's one of the things we kind of have to grapple with, is for me to sort of give an art project, I need the time to do the research. And often that time is never paid for by any institution. I have to sort of cobble it together on my own, but the output will often kind of be paid for the last sort of moments of creation. So I think that's a big thing to think about, is how can we acknowledge that art is a research process and that artists need to be paid for on the same pay scale as researchers, which also then to highlight, researchers and academic researchers are also then underpaid. Like, that is also then a meta level problem.
Yeah, I can
thank you,
also
Caroline.
relate to that. Really.
We all agree. Vladan, go.
I think that the speed and the time, it's really crucial for what we do, and because it's really not easy to analyze this. And there is also this kind of trap with the time, because like people want to follow up the trends all the time, and then you have like, you know, like I think we have now in art and also like in critical media theory, this kind of almost like a hyper trends, like a fast fashion, you know, like every year it's a new hot topic, and basically, you know, if you're trapped in this following those hyper nano trends, you know, you don't have a time to research. And I'm more like a fan of like slow investigation, slow research, and those require time, but also resources, as Caroline said. So completely onto that.
Simone, did you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, just echoing, I think, what's been said. Also, I think for myself, I keep on calling myself designer researcher, but simply because of getting into places that otherwise you couldn't, or like, depending on who I send an email, interviewing or having conversations is a big part of my practice. If I want to get in touch, for example, with one of the researchers from CNET or GBD at Imperial College, I sort of frame myself as like a visual cultures researcher, simply because otherwise it's like, why should I have a conversation with you? And so I think being that sort of intermediary and having an independent practice comes with a lot of freedom, but that doesn't mean that that's always remunerated. I mean, to Caroline's perfect analysis. And so I think, I mean, in recent years, I've been fortunate enough to have 1 or 2 fellowships. But even those, I think, are always geared towards someone that has an academic position. And it's on top of what, you know, their sort of honorarium already would be. And it would free them up to do like an extra paper. And I think even there, I've had so many discussions of like, yes, I do write, and that's an important part of my practice, but the making is as much part of, like I make it to have an end result that communicates to research, but at the same time, I also need to make it to like use the technologies that I'm researching, right? It's sort of it's a reiterative process. So it's not like looking at stuff and then sort of magically translating it into a film. Also the making of the film and the softwares that I would use to make those very much are part of the research too. So it's a constant, I mean, in some ways struggle. I think in the practice, it's actually really, I very much enjoy it. Otherwise, I don't think it would be hard to do it, because why? but I think that's something that has to constantly be explained. And I only think with a recent sort of trend of AI being a little bit more in the focus, it doesn't necessarily, it's not embraced more, understood more. I think there's a speed that picks up in sort of generating work that actually might be in the opposite direction. And so, yeah, you constantly have to refer to either slow work or hey, there is labor involved, even though I'm like, that's not slow, it's probably just realistic, right? The fact that you need like a year or two to create something that already is quite fast. But still, you need these kind of words to make that reasonable, rather than 6 months or 3 months to create something new in a new iteration. But yeah.
Joel, as a curator, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, lots of thoughts. I mean, maybe I'd invite James and Sean to sort of join me too, because I was just thinking like about how we have intersected with different sort of institutions over the course of this project. Like it's sort of emerged out of the context of small artist-run organizations like Liquid Architecture and Unsound, and now the three of us are based at 3 different universities in Melbourne. But the project has a kind of para-academic sort of aspect to it as well, in which sort of university resources are often leveraged to do things kind of outside of those contexts. And yeah, hearing people talk about their experiences with art museums, the big art museums can be so conservative. It's so infuriating. They kind of like want to sort of grab like AI art and new media art as a kind of spectacle. But you mentioned Microsoft before, Katrina. It's like we're not going to bring down big tech by like creating big tech spectacles in art museums that are sort of fully on board with some of the companies whose extractive practices our work sort of stands against. So yeah, like I don't know, Sean and James, if you want to say something, but what one example I can sort of give is we were all involved in a project earlier this year called Data Relations Summer School, and it came out of an exhibition at the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, and brought together a whole bunch of people over a week or so to do collaborative research and practice and workshops and knowledge sharing and etc. And it was supported by RMIT University and ACCA, the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, but we sort of tried to situate the project at arm's length from both institutions, sort of somewhere in between where those resources could be mobilised, but it didn't fully come under the aegis of certain institutional logics. And that was very inspired by a number of things, Sean, that you've been involved with over many years, like especially the public school, although it was obviously a much more institutionally bounded version of some of those earlier, more radical projects. But yeah, for me, I'm sort of often thinking about how you can leverage the resources of institutions without being fully recuperated and captured by them. And that's not always easy. What do you guys think?
Maybe I'll just piggyback on with one small addition. I completely agree with a lot of things that have been said. I guess if the original question that you pose is kind of like, what can cultural institutions do? Like I often see cultural institutions kind of in competition with smaller institutions within a city. So I think that kind of like competition for resources that comes at the expense of more grassroots institutions is like a problem, and they can stop doing that. But the point I maybe want to make more specifically is, especially when you talk about like, yeah, they're signing up to like create these kind of like enterprise agreements or whatever with analytics companies to pilot some whatever program about audience demographics, blah, 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 blah. And we see the same thing in institutions like educational institutions like universities, that they're creating enterprise agreements with big tech companies. and sort of like offloading all of their kind of homegrown resource development. They have built their own systems, and they're like, oh, our system sucks, so we need to just like sign up with Microsoft and get new ones. And that's a huge problem too. Like, I actually think that maybe having some of those like cultural institutions all the way up to educational institutions kind of like devoting themselves to developing alternative counter infrastructures and things like that, like would be good, rather than just like demonstrating and making agreements with the new tech that's being developed. Like it's kind of old-fashioned answer, but those are the places that have the resources and communities that can be developing those kinds of things. So that'd be a great step.
Can I give one very quick and slightly banal old-fashioned answer as well, which is that maybe saying cultural institutions is, I mean, of course, there's specificity to cultural institutions, but I've been doing some work recently on the application of machine that we have in relation to the application of machine listening in relation to bioacoustics. And all of the scientists who are doing this are also forced by the same kinds of institutional dynamics that we're talking about in the art world to partner or not partner, or be used as kind of advertorial or whatever for these big tech companies and so on. And so that question of the relationship between the institution and the corporation, or the university, and it's just it's so much bigger. And so anyway, that's why I say it's an old-fashioned and banal answer, except that it's sort of, maybe the competition isn't just downwards between cultural institutions, but also lateral with scientific institutions. I think that if there was some kind of real concerted effort within the university to take on big tech across the board, it would be quite a meaningful thing to do, but it's very, very hard to imagine at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. In restricted funding environments, big tech come in and say, hey, we'll deliver audiences, we'll deliver you analytics on the kind of people who come to the museum, so you too can leverage that innovative data to then appeal to funders to say you have, the similar kind of profiles of your audience that Facebook might have, and all these new kind of imaginaries of how AI can optimize the institution is quite intoxicating in some areas of discussion. Now, I'm very aware that we are now over by 8 minutes, and I wondered if anyone else had a question apart from me to ask the fabulous panelists, or whether Melinda wanted to very quickly jump in and say something about the question she asked earlier. Melinda, did you want to pop in if no one else is jumping up?
Oh, okay.
We'll have a brief answer to that too, like very quick.
Okay, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for your expansive, poetic, banal, hyper-real, blah, political climate change stuff tonight. It's been great. And this is a very specific question, which has sort of been answered in the chat, but I was just thinking about the ethical attributes of recording David's voice and using it again, and how that would have been different, say, if David were an Aboriginal, a First Nations man who had died, and could, would you still use that voice? And I'm thinking about, what's her name, Henrietta Lacks, the woman was the woman who all the biological research came from her one cervical cancer cell that was removed that she didn't know about. So that, that whole ethical paradigm of, And there's so much fabulous stuff, and I want to talk about toilets and chairs and trees and stuff too, but yes.
No, we definitely wouldn't have used the voice of a First Nations person without consent. I mean, definitely not. David is someone who, and thanks for turning your camera on, David. We've worked with as a collaborator on a number of projects, and in fact has been a performer on a number of our projects. And I think the logic of reproducing his voice as a clone was sort of thinking about, the way in which his performances in our project are both embodied by him and then kind of reproduced as a synthetic double. And so, but yes, I mean, I think the politics and ethics of voice cloning is going to be a pretty complicated and interesting topic, and we're already seeing, a lot of attention around the idea of vocal deep fakes and the way that they can be exploited for profit, but also in order to manipulate sort of information and so forth. I think for us, we're obviously exploring voice clones in a different way, and kind of we've talked about it as defamiliarization, denaturalization, uncanniness, disquiet, this sort of like sitting with the weirdness of the vocal performance of the clones, and also even trying to get beyond this idea of the clone as a copy or a double of a performer that might trick you into thinking it is the person themselves, but also sort of pushing clones more into their own materiality as sort of something that can be kind of, let's say, comprehended outside of the sort of this logic of reproduction. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? James, Sean, do you have an answer to that?
The only thing I was going to say briefly was just that consent doesn't get us out of the problem. That's quite a legalistic kind of response. I'm not saying that that's your response, but it's doing work for the voice clone and the AI industry to, we all know this, right? Because, the kind of click wrap contracts we all sign, which we know are bullshit. When we click to consent to the cookies or whatever, so consent is not an adequate response to the problem, and we don't really know. Sorry, David, of what systems and future uses this David's voice is being put, and we also need to take a certain measure of responsibility to the massive systems into which we're linked, like if you did Vladan's diagrammatic work, but for David's voice, and you imagine it being sucked into the speaker, and then, the cloning, and then out to the whole map, that's another, so it's not just about ethics, about consent, in other words. And I think that's we have to avoid that trap, because I think that's a productive trap for the AI industry, to make it seem as if consent or privacy sometimes is a solution to the problem, when I don't think it is.
David, did you want to say anything, just seeing as it was your voice that was extracted in that way?
Hopefully I'm rigged up a bit strangely here, so hopefully you can hear me.
Yep.
Yeah. So just two comments I guess I'd make. One, and they both don't sort of answer the question, but they're sort of it's sort of interesting that using my voice in this project, I had no idea when I was listening to that example that it was my voice. And also in a previous project I was part of with machine listening, I could never recognize my voice either. And so there's been a curious disconnect in this particular application, which is not to say, voices are not used to intentionally replicate me, but in this case, it gets changed. And for me, that's slightly, that's very interesting, because I don't feel a connection to those utterances. So just from a personal point of view, it's interesting. And then the other comment that that my partner Sonia made to me was of course in just day-to-day video work, you sign release forms. You have a release form to use. When you make a recording, you can say, can we use your recording for this project, and can we use this recording for other projects, which kind of gets you around that in a practical sense, but it doesn't get to the nub of the ethical problem, of course, that we're discussing here.
Thank you, David. Thank you, all our panelists. We have gone very far over now, so I'm going to start wrapping up. So thank you for all of you for your brilliant presentations and the fascinating discussion. I think this panel really emphasizes how through practice new questions and problems can be really illuminated in ways that other methods can't, and also the challenges of how those working in institutions can, tease out the political economy of these systems, can, begin to equip audiences with the language to be able to engage with this huge kind of cultural and social shift that you've all been discussing, and how necessary that is. So thank you again.